Hello and welcome to Connect the World. I'm Lynda Kinkade, live from CNN's World Headquarters here in Atlanta, filling in for Becky Anderson. Good to have you with us. Well, for over 3 years now, this program has been bringing you the harrowing stories from war-ravaged Yemen. Pushed by conflict to the brink of famine, combating an outbreak of cholera and dealing with an economy in tatters. Well, now the United Nations says both parties to the conflict, the Saudi-led coalition backed by the US and the UK, as well as the Iran-backed Houthi rebels, could be guilty of war crimes. A group of eminent experts on Yemen, set up by the UN Human Rights Council, says both sides may be responsible for acts such as mistreatment, torture, rape, as well as the use of children under the age of 15 in the hostilities. Well, the report comes as the US has warned Saudi Arabia that it must limit civilian casualties or risk losing some American assistance. Well, our senior international correspondent Nima Elbagir has been covering the conflict and joins me now live. And Nima, the UN Human Rights Council released this report. They've been working on it since 2017, recommending that Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Yemen be prosecuted for war crimes, but also condemning the Houthi-led rebels for recruiting child soldiers as young as 8.
Yes, both parties to the conflict were spoken about in pretty dire terms by the UN panel of experts, but they did single out the coalition for what they're saying was the majority of the civilian casualties. Let me read you a little bit from the report. They say that the airstrikes have hit residential areas, markets, funerals, weddings, detention facilities, civilian boats, and even medical facilities. Based on the incidents they examined, the group of experts have reasonable grounds to believe that individuals in the government of Yemen and the coalition may have conducted attacks in violation of the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution that may amount to war crimes. And that may amount to war crimes. Don't let that wording fool you, Lynda, because war crimes, of course, is a legal term, and it will have had to have gone before a competent authority in order for it to be labeled as war crimes. What they're saying is that they suspect that it meets the criteria of a war crime. So they're going as far as they legally can. And some of what's in this report, I mean, they talk about how the violations that they were able to note down were absolutely horrendous. And they speak about really just disgusting levels of sexual violence. In addition to that recruitment, they talk about torture of prisoners, mistreatment, the arrest and subsequent torture of human rights activists and journalists. They are deeply, deeply concerned. And there's a reason for why they're pushing so hard at this point, because their mandate is up in September. And it was such a bone of contention to get Saudi Arabia and the rest of the coalition to agree to even this one-year mandate that their fear is that they won't be allowed to continue their work. So they're trying to get out as much as they can now.
Right. So let's just look at the response, because Yemen claims that the UN is biased, while Saudi Arabia says it'll look into it. And it says it's referred the UN report to its legal team, and its coalition spokesman has told CNN that it is following up on all the reports emerging from the UN regarding the crisis in Yemen, and the coalition will take the, quote, appropriate stance after the review. Surely these findings in the report would not be news to them. What conclusion could they reach?
Absolutely, especially given that these points of concern have been raised consistently over the years. We know that President Obama actually went so far as to ban sales of their preferred laser-guided military technology from the US to Saudi Arabia because he was so concerned about the human rights implications of continuing to supply the Saudi-led coalition with this. So none of this is news. What is news is the fact that the US has finally warned Saudi Arabia. General Mattis said that they are continuing to review their support for Saudi Arabia and the Saudi-led coalition, and that that it is not essentially a blank check, is what he's trying to say. But it is a little ingenuous to say that they are now looking at this. They have been aware of these concerns about their targeting, about disproportionality, about the impact on the civilian populations since the beginning of this conflict, essentially.
Right. All right. Well, Nima, just stand by for us. I want to get some more from you. But first, I just want to look at these reports we've got that the US has warned Saudi Arabia that it may withdraw support for its military campaign in Yemen over those civilian casualties. Well, it comes as top Pentagon officials have grown increasingly concerned over the large number of civilians killed, and follows an attack earlier this month that caused mass casualties. Well, CNN exclusively reported that the bomb used in that attack that killed dozens of children on a school bus was supplied to the Saudi-led coalition by the US. Well, Nima dug into the details of that strike and others. We'll be crossing to the Pentagon in a moment for the latest, but first, here's a portion of CNN's exclusive reporting.
This video of shrapnel was filmed in the aftermath of the attack and sent to CNN by a contact in Sada. A cameraman working for CNN subsequently filmed these images for us. Munitions experts tell CNN this was a US-made Mark Mk-82 bomb, weighing in at 500 pounds. The first 5 digits there are the cage number, the commercial and government entity number. This number here denotes Lockheed Martin, one of the top US defense contractors.
We're at the forefront of the science that makes them real.
This particular Mk-82 is a paveway, a laser-guided precision bomb. Its targeting accuracy a particular point of pride for Lockheed Martin. Part of an arms deal with Saudi Arabia sanctioned and contracted out by the US government. So why does this matter? Because the devastation inflicted by the Mk-82 is all too familiar in Yemen. In March 2016, a strike on a market using the similarly laser-guided 2,000-pound Mk-84 killed 97 people. In October 2016, another strike on a funeral hall killed 155 people and wounded hundreds more. Then the bus attack on August 9th, where they're still counting the dead.
I want to bring Nima back in, our international correspondent. Nima, you've covered this story time and time again. Will this UN report have any sort of impact? Will we see any change on the ground for the people in Yemen?
It was a harder line than we have been used to them taking, and it comes off the back of increasingly harder statements coming out of the UN. But it will depend on whether the Security Council is actually willing to hold firm. What we've seen in the past is that both the US and the UK have blocked attempts to sanction the Saudi-led coalition. And that has been viewed rather with a lot of concern, because obviously both the US and the UK supply the weapons being used by the coalition in its war in Yemen. But it will depend on whether the signals we're getting out of the Pentagon, the statements that we're getting out of Secretary Mattis, whether they will actually translate into them stepping aside and allowing the Security Council to formally sanction Saudi Arabia and to formally sanction the individuals that the panel of experts says have names of whom they say they suspect of war crimes and have handed over to the Commission of Human Rights. Does it feel like a little bit of a turning point? Yes, but it still all remains on whether the US and the UK are willing to allow those sanctions to go through, Lynda, and that is still unclear.